So Third Side Media came out of training with the Blandin Foundation, actually, that happened here in Moorhead and Fargo area, where Blandin came in and I'm not sure if you know much about the Blandin Foundation, but they facilitated an inclusive communities workshop for 50 people who had applied to take part. And what was really great about that space was that it provided some opportunities for people in that room to actually put into action some of the things that we saw were perhaps missing from our community that might make it more inclusive. And so they did this great exercise where, we wrote down there were like 15 topics around the room that we had all selected as things that we saw might be in need of being addressed to create more inclusive communities. And then we kind of pared them down to about 6, and then we had some people decide to take leadership and try to facilitate what steps might we put into this to create a more inclusive community through this means. And one of the topics on the board was about creating avenues for people to do skill sharing around media production. And that was the group I ended up in, and my friend Chris Kursman became the leader of that, and he and I really started to think about, well, we have resources in this community, we just don't think that people understand or have the means to really tap into those resources. And so how do we create a space in which we might facilitate that? And so we got a startup grant from the Blandin Foundation to begin creating some structure around what that might look like. And Chris and I started working with community members and also nonprofits, both locally and then also somewhat in the Twin Cities area, to figure out how we might be able to bring some of our skills in terms of thinking about social media, for instance, or production of audio documentaries or digital storytelling or film, or a myriad of, how we can tell stories differently, creating websites, blogs, etc. And it's been really amazing work because it's pretty immediate work. So the goal has been to always create a space for people to learn some skills, and then hopefully they would then pass those skills on to someone else. So Chris and I are not the, be all end all of the process, but a starting point. And I helped YouthWorks, which is an organization based in Fargo and Bismarck, actually in North Dakota, create like a 30-second commercial spot that they put into a contest for a grant application. I've helped the Yellow Ribbon Project, which is a group of volunteers in town who serve the families of people who are currently deployed with whatever they might need. And so just having those conversations about what it is that you need out of the media, what kind of things are you trying to tell in terms of your story, how can we get you connected with some of these skills, what can we help you work on, have been really great, and the results are pretty immediate. I see my job or role in Third Side Media as really keeping my fingers on the pulse of what's new and how we can use some of these tools for social justice in a means that they might not have been intended for. So thinking about Pinterest or Instagram or Vine as spaces for political action and change, as opposed to just these neutral spaces that exist to share pictures about food. That's always my joke. I love taking pictures of my food, but I think that we can also use those spaces to inspire people for doing activist work with them, and relatively low cost, and relatively low cost in terms of your time. So thinking about how we can, share those innovative ideas and approaches that corporate interests are obviously very invested in this social media landscape of getting consumers to become buyers of their product or members of their services. I think that we can have a much more radical approach of thinking about how do we take these tools that have already been created and use them to challenge people's expectations or notions about the way the world works, and again reflect a world that is much more about equality and social justice for all. So I've also had the really great experience of teaching. I do a lot of teaching, obviously in my classrooms, but also in the community about how to facilitate the sharing of these kinds of skills, to give people ideas on how they might use these things differently, and to obviously do that from a feminist perspective, which is what I bring to the table, right? Thinking about a notion of feminism as, in the words of Bell Hooks, a movement to end sexism and all other forms of oppression, right? Through the lens of gender, but obviously related to race and class and sexuality and ability and so many other forms of identity. And so I've done a couple of workshops on using social media for social justice, and I think really trying to shift our lens away, again, from seeing social media as this neutral space, nothing is neutral, to one in which we're leveraging it for the biggest amount of potential social good out of those spaces. And one of those places has been through my work with New Leadership, which is a really fantastic organization that works to mentor, create, educate, shape educational opportunities, leadership opportunities for women in our region here. And the founder of our local chapter of that, Deb White, has done really amazing work in thinking about how do we make this an inclusive space. The participants are also always a very diverse group of women who come in and spend 5 days learning about how they can become political advocates, how they can be more involved in the political structure, how can we close the gap between women's participation and representation in the political sphere. And it's been really great to be a part of that. I've served on a couple of committees organizing that work, have staffed the event once, and then go back as in this educational capacity. And it's just really amazing to have 50 women in a room who are already inspired and committed leaders in their area of expertise, but that you bring them together and so much more can come out of this, and it becomes one of those sites where you get re-energized, where you remember why you do what you do, and maybe could connect with one of those earlier questions, right, about those survival skills, finding those spaces to re-energize, to remind yourself why this work is important, especially on those dark days when things seem like nothing will ever change, right? That eternal optimism can be reignited in spaces like that.
And that actually reminds me of one of the questions that the advisors thought was critical is exactly how do you sustain yourself when change takes time?
Yeah.
Are there other...
How do you? That is a great question. I think finding that community, obviously, of other people who can support you during, the long struggle. I think celebrating your victories is really important. Finding the time to accept that small steps might be a big victory, right? I think so often social change, and those of us who want to change society to be more equitable want it to change overnight and get very frustrated that things take time. But, you do have to sustain yourself in order to be around to see the effects of the changes that you might be putting into place. I think one of my personal ways that I've dealt with that is just, my teaching philosophy, my role as an educator is always to hopefully inspire just one of my students. So I teach probably about 200 students a semester, and one is a pretty small goal. And I'm pretty sure I inspire more than just one, but if I can find that one, then it helps to remind me why I do what I do. And it helps to fuel me for the next semester. It helps to provide me with that fire to continue to go forward. And so I set the bar purposefully low for myself in that manner, just because I know that my reach is probably broader than even I know. And I also recognize that people are at lots of different levels in their life around social justice, around issues of privilege in particular. I think doing anti-racist work is another one of those. It's a long journey, right? But I heard from someone once that it's also important to think not that long ago, this world looked very much different than what it looks like now, right? Actually, I think it was Rose Brewer, who is this really amazing sociologist, social justice advocate, activist, who's also a professor at the University of Minnesota. And she reminds us a lot that when we feel discouraged, it's really easy to just focus on the immediate aspect of our frustrations in the moment, right? That we've been toiling away with what feels like for years and maybe haven't seen much change. But if we think about the ways that the world has really significantly changed in decades, really, we are making a difference. We just can't step far enough back to see what that difference is. And so reminding ourselves that that is happening, that change is occurring, that we might just be too close to see it happening, can be one of those survival strategies of reminding ourselves, like, we are making a difference. We just might not see it yet.